Welcome to the Soul Tribe Podcast. The Soul Tribe Podcast was created to help you navigate through the world of spirituality, wellness, and self-development in an easy, grounded, and relatable way. We break down everything from the Akashic Records, manifesting, spirituality, and so much more. We want to help expand your boundaries and bring the spiritual world to you in a fun and easy way. Get ready to be inspired with tips, tools, and easy to digest information. Let's do this.
Hi, and welcome back, everyone who's already tuned in with the Soul Tribe Podcast. We are so excited for today's episode. It's just, we were overwhelmed before recording this episode. Lorena and I were messaging back and forth with each other. We were so nervous. Today's interview is going to be with Kristos and Foster Perry. So we already were familiar with them because they go to our country in Uruguay, and they do sessions for individuals who want to attend with both of them. And so they get readings and shamanic healings from them. And it's really helpful from, the conscious, subconscious level and the body, the body health, because it's almost like a full spa treatment in a way, but from the spiritual realm. So we were familiar with them from that. I had also gotten a reading from Kristos, which was amazing. He was born with abilities, and Foster has his own totally different story where he kind of got into it, and life kind of pushed him in that way, and he talks about it in this episode. But you're going to hear many different stories from them, a lot of advice, a lot of words of knowledge. And that's exactly why we were so excited about and so nervous about this episode, because we knew we were going to be in front of two individuals whom we admired, and we knew that they hold all this knowledge and they have all this stuff that they could share with us. And we really wanted you guys to be able to get that information also. So, we reached out to them and they agreed. And even though they're so busy and they have so much going on, and they could have totally said no, but they said yes, and we were just in awe of the fact that they wanted to interview with us. They were okay with it. So we were very excited, and we went into it nervous, but very easily the conversation started flowing. There's so much they have to share, so we didn't even get to half of our questions. We had already had a list of questions we had to ask them, and there was just so much to talk about. We only managed to do half of them. So we made an agreement that we will definitely down the line do more interviews with them, maybe one, maybe two, maybe more. I don't know. The sky's the limit. Whatever the universe, wants us to do. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Like, Lauren and I even went back to listen to it because we're like, wait, it was so much information. Let's listen to it again. So we've listened to it to ourselves. I mean, between Lauren and I, probably 4 times. So enjoy, guys, and it's a lot of information. So don't feel like you need to absorb it all in one. We went back ourselves. We had gotten the interview, in the moment, and then we went back to listen to it, and then we went back to listen to it again. But yeah, we can't wait to interview them again in the future, and they're just amazing, and we admire them so much. And share this with other people. The word needs to get out about them and their amazing work, and they need to be known to people that might need them. And I hope they reach the individuals that need their healings and their words and their knowledge. And I'm glad that maybe we can help those people get to them. Their shamanic experience is amazing, and their knowledge of the human incarnation is just, it's absurd how much they know. It's so crazy. But thank you so much for listening, and guys, enjoy, because we loved it so much. Hey, Kristos, and hey, Foster. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. And you guys, we consider you guys really big in the spiritual world, and a bunch of people follow you, and a bunch of people love you. My parents have been, with you guys, and I've gotten readings, and you guys are amazing. So we feel so honored that you guys are letting us pick your brains and interview you today. So thank you so much for being here with us.
We want to thank you, Lucia and Lorena.
Thank you.
It's so much fun to hear you again.
Thank you. So can you guys maybe briefly tell us about each of you, tell where you came from, what you do, or where you got to where you are, just like a brief description so the listeners know, who we're talking to if they don't know you.
Well, I'm Kristos, and I work with Foster for the last 16 years, and we're scouting the world, trying to save everybody. But we're coming both from very different experiences of spirituality. I have been born what you would call with gifts, which I don't consider gifts, but we can talk about this later, and an ability to just sense what's ahead and why it's ahead. I think that is more important. And then, of course, I got educated in a very early age in every possible concept of esoterics and exoterics, of course, religion, occult, the metaphysical. And that is a couple of years ago, and now I'm almost 51. And so it is a lifelong journey of developing. But pretty much my field is always coming from magic and psychic energy.
Mm-hmm. I'm Foster Perry, and I studied shamanism for 12 years. I was hit by lightning 3 times. I had a calling, so I followed it since I'm 9 years old. I talked to spirits, and I was very involved in journeying and, going to other worlds and bringing back information for people. And I made that a career.
That's amazing. So you were hit by lightning not once, not twice, but 3 times.
Right. I wrote a book for Bear & Company in which I talked about all those experiences. It was quite a powerful time in my life. I was young, 25 years old, when I got hit by lightning. And that started me taking this all very seriously as a path.
So do you think that was something that had to happen to you to put you on that path?
Absolutely. Because I started at 9 years old, and I started giving readings by the time I was 11. So a lot of people came to me, and I used to just, basically vacate my body and let something else talk through me. And I didn't know anything. I was talking the other day about a lot of nuns and priests came to see me when I was 11, 12, 13 years old. And I really didn't know anything about their lives. And I just kind of let go and let whatever wanted to talk through me, a spirit. And, they would talk about these priests, maybe you're gay, or maybe you shouldn't be a priest anymore, whatever. And they didn't understand what I was saying. I didn't even know what that term meant then, but the spirits knew, and that's how I began.
Oh, that's crazy. And Kristos, so you were born with abilities. Like what abilities exactly were they that you were born with?
Well, when I was born, and my first and earliest memory of sensing that something is different is, of course, on one side scaring my mother with everything I used to say. So she was very keen on making sure I don't talk when we went to neighbors or to funerals, which is a very Greek kind of hobby. We love to go to funerals of other people. And of course, for me, there was no difference between who's alive and who's dead, because all I saw was energy. And I do remember one of my earliest memories is listening to music and seeing color when I heard the sound. Of course, now we call it aura, and now we call it so many different things. The New Age provides so many different labels for all these energies. But in the end of the day, it's really about being able to see between energies, if you want. I always say to my people that an energy, an aura, a light, a color can shift. And when the color shifts, it means that you have an illuminating experience. Illuminating experience can be good and bad, of course. It depends on the choices you make. But also, I remember very vividly, I think I talked to more dead people than living, which is much more fun and more exciting. And interesting enough, sometimes I hear the same question: why am I even here, or what's my purpose? And it's fun to see that, living people say that, of course, what is my purpose of being here? And also people who passed over or didn't transcend correctly or at all still say, there must be a reason why I'm here. And I realized very early, I always say in a funny way, God didn't make me pretty, but he made me really smart. I could understand that the desire of humanity is in general, and no matter where we went after all this traveling, is to identify a purpose, a reason, a motivation that gives you like a frame, so to speak. And then I was 10 years old, and I had a teacher who stayed with me for 4 years. And that is another story. And then it was unstoppable, but I can't really tell you how I learned it, or I cannot even say that I learned something, because there was never a learning involved. So for me, it was never different. Not seeing was, there was no day where I've never seen something or picked up on something, which could be quite annoying. And I realized very quickly that first of all, not only that pretty much everybody has this, but not everybody has it active. Mm-hmm. And I think that the reason why people who want, I know people who want to study, to see the aura and be able to see energies and hear voices. And I tell them, if you start to hear voices in your head, you need medication. It's not like that. It is when information comes through and message comes through, first of all, it's always positive. I've never had a reading where I said to somebody, you're going to hell or something like this. It never, ever happened. So spirit world and spirit information is pretty much always positive. Positive means it gives you an opportunity to improve. If you want to do it, that's up to you. And so what I know now at 51, I realized at 10. And in all these decades, this principle hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Were you, just out of curiosity, Kristos, were you ever scared of those things that came up?
I was scared because it was abrupt. And I think when you're 4 years old and suddenly you have somebody standing in the middle of your room, glowing and saying stuff like, I'm here to help you. All I remember is, these little animations when Bugs Bunny is jumping off from the ceiling and, flies around. This is how I jumped off the bed in fear because you feel somebody jumping up so quick and running out. I ran out of the house and across the street. I don't even know how I didn't get killed because we lived on a very busy street. And that was my first experience with my guide and also my only one. It can be terrifying because it's not necessarily seeing a spirit that is the problem here or the issue. It is the phenomena that accompanies it. You feel weird. There's a change of atmosphere. Many people say I felt a cold or goosebumps. And this is very much for me, this is the same sensation on acid, basically. It's much more intensified when something is around. Because when you're aware of spirit energy, you bond with the spirit energy. It's almost like they see that you can see them. And the moment they sense you can sense them and see them, and worse, talk to them, they basically leech onto you. They don't want to leave because, they like conversation, of course. But that was the first experience I ever had. Eventually you get used to it and, the fear turned into excitement because I knew what to anticipate.
But do you both feel like now that you can control, because each of you have kind of different gifts, right? Do you both feel now that you can control it where you can say, I can shut it off and I can shut it on?
Yes.
Oh, Foster much more than me. Foster much more than me because he's a healer. So he can literally, he has a whole procedure and a ritual before he starts working. For me, it depends. Sometimes when I'm very tired and very exhausted and, it's the 19th travel in 10 days and, hundreds of people. When I get into a certain mood, I have a very hard time shutting it down. And that is part of my moodiness, as people would say. I'm sure you have a lot of people, if you would ask them, they would say, God, Kristos can be so moody. But it is accumulation. It's a lot about an accumulation of information for others. You know what I mean? and it numbs you at some point. It's almost like you've eaten too many pizzas, and as nice as it was and as tasty as it was, your body will feel like a rock, basically. And that's the same sensation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, me, I have to stay at a certain frequency the entire time I'm healing. You cannot go and dip below that frequency. You have to set up the space beforehand. You have to make sure that, all the guides, everybody is appeased. You give offerings, and then you begin the healing work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not over until the last person, is done, which could take, at least 12, 13, 14 hours.
So to do that, do you have to follow a certain diet, certain foods that will help you keep that energy up?
Well, we eat vegetarian. We don't eat meat at all. Mm-hmm. I don't eat any dairy. I don't eat all sorts of foods. But before work, you don't want to be heavy. You don't want to eat too much, even when you're working. Mm-hmm. You have to stay light. You have to stay in a very high place.
I think that the choice of food you make and the choice of diet you make, to be more precise, will influence your energies. I'm sure you had the experience when you're going on a juice fast or on a no sugar and no dairy and no wheat. Within 24 hours, you feel a change in your perception of the body. Some people benefit from that. I know a lot of mediums, authentic mediums that I met in my life, who ate what you would call now vegan, and we're talking about 35 years ago, there was not even a term for this. And I started getting it, I rejected to eat meat. By the time I remembered eating it the first time, I would just reject the idea of meat. So I don't know if it was a taste thing or it was the memory that it was Eastern and I saw the lamb before it got slaughtered and cooked, so to speak. But I just couldn't see food as meat as food, excuse me. So there was a natural resistance to it almost.
Yeah, and you guys are currently in Buenos Aires, and it's like Uruguay and Argentina are the capital of meat.
The capital of meat. But what's interesting? Over the last couple of years, we are in an area here which is called Las Canitas. And there are so many small, of course, not to be compared with US or California by any means, but a lot of very small, holistic, focused bio stores, you would say. You find definitely tofu and seitan and tempeh here. You find certain ingredients and certain herbs here. But we were just told yesterday that this is not common for Argentina. So there is definitely a shift of consciousness. But of course, when there's a tradition in a country, it's not easy. I don't even know if it's necessary to change the perception. But to go back to your question, the idea is, what do you want to achieve in your body? And when we talk about healing, a healer really has to have a healthy body. Otherwise, what kind of healing do you provide? It means the quality of your healing depends on how well you maintain your body, physically, spiritually, energetically. I remember going with Foster to Glastonbury and seeing a quite well-known healer. Smoking and drinking and then complaining that no one comes for healings. And I was genuinely surprised. I thought, what kind of healing would you provide? So for me, the logic is, if you have a clean lifestyle, let's use the word clean, a pure lifestyle, a honest lifestyle, you can provide a much cleaner content to the people who come to you. I almost want to say you are almost obligated. Now, is a diet necessary? Of course not. Everybody's body is different, and some people need meat and they need broth. But what they all don't need is nicotine. They don't need alcohol. They don't need sugar. I think these are the toxins that in the end can really diminish your abilities. or in everything that makes you high, basically. I mean, again, I'm not morally opposed to it, but there's a reason why certain things are called hallucinogenics. And as Foster says, you have to be in control of your energy if you want to achieve a change of energy in somebody else. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of energy. And Foster does it for like 40 years now. He's trained to do it. He doesn't know it any different. So the food can definitely help to intensify situations.
Did you guys try mate? Would they drink there the green tea stuff?
I do try it. I am just not the person who shares it.
Yes, I understand.
Because I learned very early that mate is a herb that from a spiritual point bonds people in their karmic. In other words, it shares karmic bonds. So I drink from you. I share your issues if you want. I mean, it's less dramatic than it sounds. But the idea is with herbs and everything that is infused, herbal, is its energy. In spirit, in shamanism, Foster can tell you about the spirit identity. You drink a cup of tea. It's not just tea. It is the essence of the spirit in the plant. And that is shared, so to speak. And it will have an effect in the system.
That's such an interesting way to see it, especially like I think when most people think about mate, they think about getting together with their friends and drinking it and sharing stories. So that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
I wanted to see, like, I don't know, because I'm super interested in shamanism, and I do feel like there's a lot of preconceived ideas and notions that people have about shamanism. So maybe you can give us kind of a definition of what a shaman is and what they do and how you help people, really. I think we all have this idea that might not be necessarily completely true or accurate. You know what I mean?
Well, shamans are storytellers. I'm a shaman who sings. So I like to sing all the stories. I like to sing from the spirits. I let the spirits sing through me. So if I have a plant spirit, I like the plant to sing through the body instead of just bringing the plant. So that the essence of the spirit of the plant goes through them. And I do that with many kinds of healings. There's a lot of prayer. Main shamanism, definitely, you have to do the medicine wheel. I would suggest, because you have to balance yourself. You do the vision quest. You have to go out, make a circle in nature. You don't eat for 3 days, 3 nights, and you cry for a vision. We do lots of different things with people in shamanism, like shamanic journeys with a drum. Of course, the making of the drum and getting the spirit of the drum, painting it, learning what your power animals are, learning what your spirit allies are, even as plants. You have plant familiars, animal familiars. It's very similar in many ways. As I get older, I understand that witchcraft is very similar. Wicca is very similar to many things that I do, because we both share a knowledge of herbs. We share a tremendous knowledge of spirits and of the dead and of working with your ancestors. So shamans incorporate all of that. They are seers, many of them. Every shaman has an expertise. I met a shaman who could walk through walls. I met a shaman who could, bilocate, whatever. There's different gifts that shamans develop, and they develop one gift very, very well. And for me, the calling was healing and giving the readings and, just helping people to get better and to find the better version of themselves and to come back into balance. Shamanism, I think, is important now because it is nature-based. It is definitely the idea of recycling or holistic living, and shamans are the reconnection to nature and to the forest. I lived in the Amazon forest. I lived in India. I lived in Tibet. I lived in all sorts of places. I love Africa. And I'm very interested in all their forms of shamanism as well.
Well, so each place has kind of their own kind of spin or way of kind of their rituals, right?
They do. And I think now neo-shamanism incorporates all of it. So you can do Druidic rituals, you can do Siberian rituals, you could do Amazonian rituals because they're so diverse in the Amazon. You could go to Peru, which is a shamanic culture. You can go to India because a lot of yogic practices very similar to shamanism. I wouldn't even see very many differences. So I like all these different traditions. And I think as we do Celtic shamanism, or we do, even ancient forms of shamanism, we're finding even now with the Lascaux caves and shamanic painting, in caves, they're now finding lots of DNA that was all done by women, not by men. We're finding a tremendous amount of women coming to shamanism. And when men do, they are transformed. For instance, when I had my transformation with lightning, and I couldn't walk, I couldn't do it. I didn't even want to talk to anybody for 6 months. I only sang. And, I had all these strange waves in my body, like being a radio set, and you could just listen. And I didn't want to talk to people. I went into silence. And so began a whole teaching on another level by spirits.
So my mom had the experience of him singing. Do you remember that, Noah? Mom said that she couldn't believe how it sounded. Like, she couldn't believe that the noise was coming out of your body and your throat, that it was very almost like dramatic, and you'd feel it.
Yes, you can do up to 7 notes at the same time, but not necessarily me who sings. It is definitely the spirits. They taught me the songs, and it's right after I got hit by lightning that I started singing. So and then different plants gave me their songs. You meditate with a plant, you spend a lot of time with a plant, and then you have a repertoire of songs and stories. Fairies give me stories now, very much like a witch. And I learned fairy kind of songs. So I started singing the old Celtic fairy songs to people wherever I am, according to the person, what's their hereditary, their genetic past. And the shaman just, takes out the salvia, takes out some rosemary, does a limpia, meaning we do a purification on somebody. People want the straight talk, so you teach them a lot of honesty. Talk to me with honesty, very straight, like a confession, and let's clear everything in your past by telling it to me straight, your life story. And then we change the story in some way together, and they start to have a healing.
That's amazing. So do you attribute the lightning to this path that you're on? Well, to your life, really?
Well, it started at 9. I just didn't want to, I wanted to please my parents before that and after that. So I just went through all my schooling after that. And I started groups when I was about 11 years old, the beginning of shamanism. I met a lot of teachers. I met lamas and different people starting at 11. And then I wanted to put it aside. I just wanted to be a normal teenager. And I went to Georgetown, I went to universities, I went to art school, I did lots of things. And then finally at 25, I got hit by lightning. And I realized, no, this is a calling. I can't put it off. It follows you. And then you have a near-death experience. You come back from it and you start your work. Kristos is the same. He had 2 comas in his life. He had a near-death experience, very similar. So I, in many ways consider Kristos a shaman as well, because his story is so similar. He studied magic and Kabbalah and so many things. But when he's working, very similar and very profound. When they call you, they call you.
Yeah.
You can't ignore it.
It was like a
wake-up call. Before we go, I wanted to ask you, because I know with shamanism and a lot of people are, I don't know, I'm not sure how I feel about it, but with like ayahuasca.
Yes.
I know that's like a big thing right now. I'm not sure. I'm kind of weird with substances or like letting things take over my body, but I think it's so in right now. And a lot of people are like turning to that. What is your take on that?
Well, I told you I lived in the Amazon. So I lived in the Peruvian Amazon. I lived in the Brazilian Amazon, and I did ayahuasca 1 year study. So I have to take ayahuasca off and on quite a bit. You go through your own death with ayahuasca. I was already a seer, so it was too profound for me. It was too many imagery to sort through. So I had to learn to meditate beforehand, to slow it down, to start to understand it. Because, you start seeing a frame. I would see, all sorts of symbols and another language, and I would, things would be on fire, or I would all of a sudden be with animals and becoming an animal. So I was learning shamanism through ayahuasca as well. And when you walk into the rainforest, if all the sounds and everything is still going when you're in there, you're one with the forest. If the forest becomes very quiet, you haven't done your work. So the shamans taught me a lot about ayahuasca. And when I finished, I said, it's not for me. It's not going to be my study. It's not going to be my main practice. I love datura. That's one of my favorite plants. for protection. Second, I got very involved with tobacco. Certainly tobacco can be a hallucinogen if you do it properly. I got you have to do the Native American church with peyote. You go through various stages in shamanism. But over that year was my initiation into plant substances, into the different spirits of the plants, even when they seduce you. There's that whole thing where you meet the great woman of a plant, or if you're a woman, a man. It's very fascinating, I have to say. And the colors are all iridescent, opalescent. You talk to insects, you talk to birds. It's quite an incredible practice. Do I believe that it's the main practice of shamanism anymore? Not really. It's certain shamans specialize in plants. I think after a while, it's too much for too many people. I brought more than, 500 people to the Amazon. And their experiences were very different than mine. They couldn't control it. I had to spend a lot of time grounding them. And I believe that you shouldn't take a shortcut anymore. I believe sometimes it's too much of a shortcut for people. It's not the full, genuine experience.
Now, let me comment on this, because in my tradition, and where I come from, substances are forbidden, period. Not that, and let me give you my take on what I see, because I've never been high in my life. So, and I'm not morally opposed to it. I mean, everybody can do whatever they want. They're called hallucinogenics for a specific reason, because that's what they call. They cause a different call in the psyche. It's like watching a movie with a different subtitle, if you want. And I think that when you start, especially because you mentioned ayahuasca as a spirit is a healer. It's a very serious looking, a little scary looking, but very serious, very elegant spirit that is more than willing to help somebody and to let the plant be effective when the person really, really needs the help. So where I saw the effectivity of ayahuasca was people with huge traumas, PTSD, abuses, broken psychological backgrounds. You know what I mean? That's when the spirit was amazing, I have to say, because it really understood this human being really needs me. It doesn't just call me in order to be high, or worse, to pretend. You see, a drug can make you pretend. And people, of course, get used to it. And when you get used to a substance, you are not in control of that ability. Now, that can work, as Foster says, in different traditions. I know that in Peru there is, I think now they have for tourists, ayahuasca happy hour. I mean, it exists, you know what I mean? And people go and they get hooked on that stuff, and, they have a nice trip. I mean, of course, you go to Amsterdam and to the Netherlands and so many countries now, and, pot is available and people are high, and which is fine, which is really fine. But it has, if we distinguish here, the spiritual effect of using a plant. For us, plants are medicine, and you better have a good reason to ingest this medicine. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean? Yeah. Otherwise, the plant can retaliate. These plants can turn mean on users, so to speak. And we see this in so many examples, how people basically just fall apart and become criminal, and then they go dealing, and then they steal, and then they kill, and then they see, green aliens everywhere. This is what the spirit does. The spirit says, how dare you, and use my essence for no apparent reason.
Yeah, because I only did these plant substances with shamans, in an Amazonian environment. So it was very different for me. There was one time when the shaman said, we're not going to protect you anymore. And so I went through the poison darts. I went through a shaman. When you're on ayahuasca, you do not have an aura. That's a very important thing. So anything can come into you. So you have to have protection. So I was with these shamans, and a shaman piggybacked inside of me, like a possession, and stayed with me all the way to America. And it was not a good experience, I have to say.
So what is the aura like
So
shut down during that process or something?
What it does, what any toxicity does, by the way, it doesn't matter what is the toxin, whatever changes the chemical composition in your blood, for example, or in your organs, will diminish the effectivity of your aura. And so when I look at heavy drug use, or when we went to Peru just 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and there was of course a lot of shamans from the mountains who use ayahuasca. It's basically Swiss cheese. And so it's not necessarily the aura doesn't exist, but much more important than the aura is the matrix that actually holds this whole thing together. It's difficult to explain because every book about the aura will tell you about colors and chakras and spinning. And it's the most unimportant part, because what I always saw, and I was surprised that no one paid attention to it, is that what keeps the sheets of the aura, the levels of the aura and the chakras together, is a construction, if you want. It's like a scaffolding, you can almost imagine, that keeps everything together. And if that construction, this matrix as I call it, gets injured, it's almost like having a missing bridge or a disconnection, which can, with time, have a domino effect and collapse the whole thing, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So when people take these substances, and I want to point out, because Foster said it very clearly, you have to approach this with respect.
Always.
You have to have the rituals, you have to have the ceremony, you have to make sure that everything is in order. If you go to voodoo, for example, funny enough, the word voodoo means healing, if anything, and their rituals before even a spirit is invoked, it's almost 2.5, 3 hours of singing and dancing and preparing the space. In other words, for them, the nettering, the allowing the God or the divinity of their religion to come through them and exercise healing or answers or phenomena or protection is the most important part. But the preparation is the most crucial element. And so the better the preparation, the better the effect. I had to learn to do all these effects on my own. That means I trained my mind. First of all, it was a mind training. Then it's called a heart training, to manipulate the heartbeat, to manipulate the rhythm. Now, of course, with all the devices we have and very sophisticated machineries, we can see how meditation or breathing or mantras or biofeedback, for example, can influence the brain. And so the only thing that a drug does in general is it shortcuts everything. It gets you high, so to speak. But I've met also people who did it the right way, who went to ayahuasca, they had a wonderful experience, they didn't get sick, they don't have diarrhea, they didn't feel like dying. They said it was a very nice, very peaceful, meaningful experience. And I think this is what happens when you bring authenticity and discipline to the ritual. That is the idea. Shamanism is, because you said something, and I appreciate this question, is what is how people perceive shamanism. They think it's some wild thing where you go crazy.
No.
And it is really the opposite. It's very structured. It has rules. It has a respect for life. I mean, it looks very wild, if you want to use this term. And especially Europeans will think, I go to a workshop and I just go nuts for 3 days and I feel better. And this is the big misconception when they come to Foster especially and learn shamanism, how much discipline is involved in it. Mm-hmm. You see, my tradition is disciplined in nature. Discipline is my second nature anyway. So it has a lot to do with do what you want and how you want it, just no shortcuts are allowed. And people these days, Foster used the term neo-shamanism. There's also neo-magic, new age. People want shortcuts. I remember a nice little anecdote where the Dalai Lama was in New York and he gave this 2.5-hour lecture on the Heart Sutra and how important it is now to do it and what it will do and the discipline and the meditation. And eventually, after 2.5 hours of passionate explaining, this young man gets up and says, well, I heard all this already. When are we getting the new teachings? And the Dalai Lama in his wisdom says, when you're using the old ones. You see, and I think that's very symptomatic in our field. These days, and we're going to talk later a little bit, I think, because you wanted us to give our take on 2020. If you don't have a spiritual connection on a regular basis, it will show in your life as a problem. I'm convinced about this.
Another thing that I feel is very important is if a shaman sleeps with you, has sex with its students and, promises them enlightenment or something, that's not a real shaman anymore. Mm-hmm. And you've already crossed a thing. So there's a lot of fake shamans now who just do it, to sleep with people or to, somehow it's a popularity for them. I have no idea.
I mean, this is absolutely forbidden.
It's forbidden.
There has to be an element of ethic. And we meet a lot of people. I get super upset, and Foster, of course, beats them in the end. You do not cross the line to a student. You cannot be a spiritual teacher or a doctor or an advisor or a counselor and cross that line. And I know that people are more than willing, by the way, to feel selected or, chosen by a guru or a teacher. But the moment this kind of taking over takes place, I can guarantee you it has nothing to do with spirituality or a tradition or a discipline.
Also, shamans bring a lot of peace because, even yesterday in a workshop, all the different facets of shamanism came out. Like there were dead people in the room that people brought with them that were attached to them, through car accidents, all sorts of things. And we helped each dead person to pass to the other side. And so they went into the light, and you could feel the peace in the room. There were people whose houses just were full of spirits. They had so many ghosts in their house. So we had to talk to the ghosts in the workshop, try to help the spirits to leave. And then finally, they would all leave the house. Then we had people who had attachments of spirits. For instance, what's an attachment? It's more like a phantom, like a thought form that is built up over time, and we had to do extractions on people to release these thought forms. And then people started to feel better, especially people who were very sick, and some people who just had mental, issues when they were children, a parent who was mentally ill or bipolar or, having to live with that and the consequences of that. So shamanism in healing, when you're extracting, when you're breaking whatever cords to other people, which are dependencies, or you're breaking old family curses, somebody who cursed themselves in a family, or magic that was done to them, you have to reverse magic, very much like a witch does a binding spell. Same idea in shamanism. And we use angels and archangels and demons and all of that in our work.
Because we don't differentiate. You see, I think the big misconception is that when people are trained over centuries to believe something, then it becomes real. It doesn't mean that it is real. But if I tell somebody that blonde people are dumb, and it goes on for years and years, now we have the misconception that blonde people are sexy and horny all the time, but dumb. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is, I think, the enemy in spirituality, is that preset belief of what you're supposed to believe, and you better believe it. And when you believe it, you're one of us. Mm. And if you believe something else and you question established belief, you're automatically out.
So you believe it's almost like a placebo effect where I believe it and so it becomes real and it affects me.
You know what's interesting? There is this Nobel Prize winner, I think in physics, I can't remember his name, who when he won was asked an interesting question about his invention or about his discovery. And he said, I always wonder if what I found was there before I found it or it was there because I found it. Mm-hmm. So you see, this is the most elementary aspect of spirituality, at least in my tradition, the Hermetic tradition, is that yes, things exist, but they cannot exist physically without you, as an individual, creating them, conscious or subconscious. And then there is the collective subconscious, which provides, of course, a more unified idea. That's why we have all these trends in the world where suddenly we all like a certain kind of music. We all like a certain kind of fashion. We all like a certain kind of actress. We certainly can, it's where the collective suddenly seems to synchronize, so to speak. But it's dictated today by the media. So we're all on our phones and we're creating our opinion about this. And because we're creating an opinion, we create a resonance in ourselves, which must manifest. There is no way around. So I always teach my students the power of thoughts. We don't need to talk about it. Of course, it exists, but it's nothing compared to the power of emotion. What really manifests is the emotional aspect. In other words, you cannot visualize and create vision boards and just visualize you having a great life if you don't know what it feels like. You see what I mean? The feeling is the most important. To close the circle to your original question, drugs create feelings. The reason why a drug comes into spirituality, in all metaphysical components, is the people cannot reach a certain emotional idea. They cannot feel happy or euphoric or healthy, and the drug represents that. You know what I mean? And so they feel it instantly. And so, of course, they feel it, and the brain is high anyway. So it says, yes, I'm healing, I'm flying, I'm invincible, I'm sexy, I'm strong, I can do it. That is what cocaine does. Cocaine, from my observation, is it makes people being convinced that their feeling is real. Unfortunately, we also know that when the feeling subsides because the drug is out of your system, you need to keep the feeling up.
Yeah.
And now we are in the medical field of addiction. So this has nothing to do with spirituality.
Yeah. And do you feel like
it was a long journey to a question?
Yeah, sorry. So there's a lot of, aside from drugs, another drug is alcohol, right? And there's a lot of, it's a normal thing. It's considered socially acceptable where you go to a party and, the first thing they do is, do you want wine? Do you want beer? Do you want whiskey or whatever? Do you guys see that this also affects the awakeness of everybody? Like, are people more shut down and more off because of this is something socially normal for everybody now?
Well, I can give you a little experience, a little anecdote of my experience. I have a couple of friends that I like very much in LA, and we go out, and I know exactly when it's time to go home. It is after the first drink. They just don't turn nice. That's what alcohol does. It's like a drug very quickly. It just makes people, some are mean drunks, some are happy drunks, some are crying drunks, which are the worst because I still prefer the happy drunks. But it brings your emotions up, isn't it? How many times do you hear, I went to a party, got drunk, and, accidentally slept with somebody? Or I did something, and they blame it on the alcohol. This is exactly the same idea. So the concept is here it's not the alcohol's problem. It is to know what it does in your system. When you give an outer tool, a power, and that can be alcohol or a guru. I know people who say, I will not do anything unless my guru tells me what to do this month. It's the same thing. There's no difference. We offer our emotional ability to an outer element, so to speak. We become dependent on it. And that is alcohol. This is chocolate, by the way. It's sugar, of course, which is much worse than alcohol, by the way. Ultimately, what it does is it just reduces the filter in your emotions. It takes over, so to speak. It's almost like taking over somebody's Instagram account for a day. Suddenly you have a different content. Suddenly there is a different voice, a different soundtrack. And that's when people, when they got sober the next day, usually in jail, they say, oh my God, what did I do? I would never have done this sober. My father used to say, a drunk man's words are a sober man's thoughts. Yeah. And I think there's some truth to it, because I've seen people in a state of, drunkenness, saying things that they would have never ever said in a normal state. But it must be somewhere there. Otherwise it wouldn't have come out. So nothing can come out unless it's there in the first place.
Plus, we have met many people, shamans, witches, and definitely voodoo practitioners who, when they are in their states of, trance or being in a dance or even doing icaros in ayahuasca, you see people very, very high. They're drinking, I've seen voodoo practitioners drinking an entire bottle of rum. And then when the ritual is over, they are not drunk. Right. Or the shaman is not in a high state. Right. It is only the spirits that drink these spirits. They don't really drink it. They inhale it. Or, we offer all this different food in shamanism, gazpachos, different offerings. And the spirits kind of inhale it. They inhale the perfumes. They inhale the smells or the smell of the liquor. They don't really consume it, but nobody is actually drunk when they're in a ritual using it. And that is always fascinating.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy.
We've witnessed that many times. And yet very natural.
Very natural.
Very natural, because it is the power that, I always compare it very lightly. When people say to us who know our schedule and they know our travel schedule and they know how we the months and months and months we are on tour, and they say, how do you do that? And I can only honestly say energy takes care of me. Of course, 10-hour flights are no joke, especially if you have 3 of them in a month. Moving from Airbnb to hotel is no fun. And doing this 7, 8, 9 months a year. But once you start working, and I've seen this with Foster, I've seen this with me, the moment I'm here to do what I'm supposed to do, I don't feel any of that. So I do believe that energy, higher frequency, if you want to call it, almost eliminates any effect of tiredness, of almost exhaustion, I want to say. So I don't know if we're just used by that, but I can sense it the moment I can be tired in between sessions, and the moment the person comes in, I'm like a machine, you know what I mean? And even Foster, he's tired. He worked on 15 people yesterday. He comes back and he bounces back in no time. And that is what an authentic relationship with your spirit does. It takes care of you. I do believe that very much. And I think when you are, let me say the word, high on energy, you don't need more stimulation. Can you imagine me on ayahuasca? You could scrape me off the floor, basically. I've been, I started as a DJ to make money many years in the 80s ago. And I've been around cocaine and drugs and heroin. And I've seen it, what it did to people. I just never felt once tempted to try it, because I thought, if this reaction that they have is the result of it, I feel like this all the time. With no side effect, of course. So the idea,
you don't need it.
Exactly, you become it, exactly. And I think that this is what ultimately, when you have I don't want to say discipline because it sounds like work, but if you have a devotional practice that makes you feel good, that can be something very little in the morning, getting up before the sun rises and see the sun come up, and you say, thank you for my life and for the experience, and surround me with light. Something very, very simple can have a very, very big effect if you do it long enough. You see, and this is where I said people expect the instant miracle these days. Get me healthy and hurry up because I have a hair appointment. One day I'm going to write a book about the crap I hear sometimes, and I'm going to mention names and addresses because, you cannot believe the stuff people say, Also, people just don't listen anymore. I said to this guy, you're going into hydroculture and, landscaping. He says, no, I'm a gardener. I'm like, are you nuts? That's exactly what I said. So it is interesting how people want answers, but they're not capable of understanding the content that comes through sometimes.
Yeah.
And the healing, of course, with Foster is very different because he communicates with you while you're on the mattress, while you're lying on the ground, and he works on you. So you can sense it, you can feel it much quicker. Yeah. That is the idea. But ultimately, it's all a question of, understanding what you want to achieve. And therefore, let's not forget, and I want to take the opportunity to mention to your listeners, you need a spiritual discipline. There is no way around it. If you want to make any difference in the world, if you want to survive this world, because it's not going to get much easier, you need some kind of devotional practice. Very often, Foster and I, we mention the words witchcraft, right? And people say, oh my God, witchcraft. Well, what am I going to do now? The broom. And I said, well, a modern way to call witchcraft is quantum physics. And then they relax. So literally, you just need to change the word, and it's the same thing, and it relaxes people. You see, 500-600 years ago, willpower and the connectivity with nature was got you basically burned and hung. Now we go on YouTube with our little Starbucks coffee and watch quantum physics being presented. Yeah.
So crazy.
That's the idea.
Wait, going back to
podcasts. Then there are podcasts like yours, you see, who try to make a difference, which I appreciate very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
I want to say something in shamanism, though. We're definitely not that Christian. Because, I don't believe in sin.
Or religious.
I'm not religious. I don't believe in sin. I don't believe in, anything but an original blessing. I don't believe in guilt. So a lot of it is a correction of thinking in shamanism, a different perception. And one of the most important things is, the devil. And, people say, oh, it's all the devil. But for me, the devil is really a phantom. It's human creation. It's not a real thing. I've never actually found it. And I understand what evil is. I understand when there's dark energies in the body, things like that, and you remove it. But the real thing is phantoms. It's the real spirits that come into you. They actually come into your body, gods, goddesses, all sorts of things I've watched over the years are very empowering. I like the older gods, the older goddesses. I find them very effective, and I find them returning in my own work. So every god and goddess is a frequency for me. It's a specific sound even. And they all have their own particular messages and songs, and they are aspects of divinity. And the closer we get to divinity and their diversity, Sophia or Hecate or any of these goddesses, I'm starting to include them in traditional shamanic celebrations and ceremonies, which is something no shamans really are doing. They do I learned a very traditional path, and now we are embracing, as traveling shamans, all the things that we've learned from different schools.
And then in shamanism, so I know that you have the person in front of you and you're helping them heal. Is this also like ancestral things, or is it just the present life?
No, it's everything. They can include past lives. It include ancestral lives, the genetic inheritance that you receive. Of course, you want to clean up a whole family if someone's coming to us, and there's how can I say, a kind of break in the family, like maybe the father has a second family and you didn't know about it.
Very popular in Argentina.
You see it. You tell them.
Very popular in Argentina. It's amazing.
Remember, spirituality is honesty.
Yeah.
It's telling the truth.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of truth telling. There's a lot of fire ceremony, water ceremonies to purify you, to burn things, to transform things. You're constantly doing that. You're changing perception. And slowly, when somebody has a realization, then comes the healing. And healing itself comes through you. It doesn't come from you. So I'm not actually using my own energy. I'm just showing up, allowing the spirits to do their work, understanding the structure of the ceremony.
And you know what Foster describes is and this is the only reason why I never worked with anybody before that, because I saw a lot of quacks in the world. And I thought, I'm going to work on my own. When I met Foster, and interesting enough, I saw him working the first time in Amsterdam.
Oh, really?
That was the first time. It's so interesting. Yes. He had a wonderful little organizer, Nina, and Nina said, why don't you come and visit Foster here? So I came and I saw him working. And I think I've never seen somebody being able, within a short treatment, what we're talking about here, to change a color frequency in somebody. Usually it takes minimum months of discipline, but I've never seen somebody who was able to shift a colors that quickly, so to speak. You remember when I said a shift of color indicates a change of consciousness. And I really believe it is the thing that he was hit by lightning. It just did something to him, not once, but 3 times basically, which are all documented, by the way. And the moment I want to clarify, it's not really difficult to get better in spirituality. To get you there is not difficult. It's like going to the dentist and taking care of that one tooth, right? That really hurts. It's not difficult, but your job is to go and brush your teeth and floss them.
Yeah.
And the same in healing. You have to go home and maintain it.
It's the daily practice, right?
Is the most important thing. What
do you do? What do each of you do? Like on a daily, I don't know if you have a morning ritual or something like that.
I think the thing is, we are basically 24/7 immersed in our work. So we're not doing something specifically every day, unique, because we live it. It's like a fitness trainer. When we see a fitness trainer who looks amazing, right? The body is muscular and fit and lean and affected. He's there all the day. He's all day in the gym. And so the immersion of being constantly in these energies, I think that is our practice. Nevertheless, for me personally, I am a researcher and I have luckily access to a very specific, I cannot say too much about it, but groups who allow me and give me insight into very old scriptures and very old texts, so to speak, which I then recycle. I connect the dots, if you want. And then I am very much involved in ritual magic and in the mental development that is connected to it, so to speak. Again, a couple years ago, we called it witchcraft. Now we call it quantum physics. But the practice is important. Honestly, at this point, I really don't care what you do.
That's what I was going to ask you. If someone's listening and they say, "Oh, well, I'm going to do something daily," what is it that they can do, or what do you recommend that they incorporate into their daily life?
A prayer, and setting the tone for the day. Setting the tone for the day. If you can get up in the morning and you open your eyes, and if possible, you can have a little positive affirmation, pinned to the ceiling, that the first thing you see is that affirmation. And you take this affirmation, say, yes, I confirm my light. I confirm that I am healthy, I'm wealthy, I'm protected, I'm prosper. I am, anything that makes you feel good, basically. I always taught very early to just get up in the morning right before sunrise and witness the sun rising and surround yourself with the light of the spirit and say, protect me and guide me and thank you for life. And you set the tone in the morning. I think this is the most powerful part. And it can be a breathing exercise, by the way, which I think is so underestimated, because breathing exercises can literally change the matrix if they're done correctly. It can be a little ceremony like in Buddhism. It can be a prayer. It can be a poem even. It can be a moment of the 5 Tibetans in the morning. Yoga itself is done traditionally before the sun rises. You have to be finished. So by the time the sun rises, your body is cleansed, purified, moved, expanded, and then you just do shavasana and you receive the light. So the way you set the tone in your intention, and that daily, that will translate into your life. And I can guarantee you, things will get better because you choose to feel better from the beginning. It is a choice. Feeling better in life is a choice, nothing else. You mentioned so nicely that we had a session and that the things that came through made sense for you and you can actually experience them now. First of all, it was all there already and you made it into your discipline. You see, you took the reading and did something with it. I
really did. Yeah, you told me something and I took half of it seriously and the other half I didn't, but exactly what I didn't take seriously is what ended up happening. But you literally pinpointed where I'm living now, like that I was going to move. And at the time I was living in Cayman Islands. Yeah.
Right. But again, the desire to change was there all together already.
Totally.
You see? And there's never, and this is when I see so-called psychics, and I really don't like the word, when they say only this is the path, only this is the idea. Very, very rarely there's only one path in a contract with a soul. There's usually 2 or 3. It's almost like the fantasy of having one soulmate. I mean, if you have only one soulmate in the world, go hang yourself, because good. I think that's great. And imagine your soulmate turns out to be the biggest jerk on the planet. I mean, then really, pop a vein. You know what I mean? These things are, sorry, but these things are basically illnesses and misconceptions of people who play spiritual teachers without having one authentic ability, and these are things that get copied and copied and copied. And then suddenly we have the soulmate and the twin flame and the purpose and that's it. It's not. We come with a frame. We're all born with a frame. In shamanism, it's the basis of their belief is that you come with a frame, but the content is lateral movement. There's always the power to change it. If you feel you want it, not if you just want it, but you have to align the feeling with the wanting.
Totally.
And so there is
like
no real right. There is no, for me at this point, of course, lighting a candle and a little incense in the morning and setting the tone, that is already a lot. People think that's all. It's a lot. I appreciate very much when you see the Quran. The Quran gives you instructions to pray 5 times a day. Okay? Which I think is a great concept because, first of all, it keeps you 5 times a day away from doing stupid things, and it's a practice. It's an incorporated spiritual practice in your daily life, which is also a thing where Foster and I always say spirituality in any direction should never need you changing your life. You see, I'm allergic to the word change because change indicates there's something wrong. And there is hardly ever anything wrong. The real word is transformation. You want to transform, get better, get lighter, get hopefully smarter, which is, I think, a very good goal to go into spirituality. But at this point, even inventing a practice, you know what I mean? I light a candle and I do 3 movements and I hear a song and I feel better. If you do this every day, your subconscious and your consciousness will connect it with a certain feeling of contentment and peace. And that is the idea, you know. I tell always my people these days, in shamanism, forgiveness is a very important goal. But sometimes it's important to forgive people not because they deserve it, but because you deserve to have peace.
Yeah. Yep.
Amen.
And you know, you deserve to have peace. And therefore, I might not, in my own experience, might not get the apologies that I were hoping to get. And at this point, it wouldn't even make a big difference. But I deserve peace. And so I have the power to forgive because I deserve peace, not because I give in. You see, some things cannot be forgiven. It is just the nature of things. And that's when I say, if you feel that you have reached your limit, your natural limit, please don't cross it. I think all these, how can I say this, ideas, you know, of power through, go through, try harder, break through, useless. It's really useless in the end because you have a natural boundary of how far you need to go. And if your soul says, listen, that's how far you need to go, it's enough. Now allow peace in yourself. That's the story. That's why I have such a problem with conventional therapy. I mean, how many years can you talk about your mother or yourself, which is worse? You know, I would kill myself after 10 years of therapy. Not that I say it's wrong, and some people definitely need it, but at some point, the analysis has to come to an end, and transformation has to be the goal. You know, changes, again, I don't like the word because it means something's wrong. But in shamanism, healing is seen as a corrective way. You correct yourself within your limits. And that's enough. It's us who think that it's not enough. Spirit always says, we are very happy with what you've done so far. We are really happy. We think it's great. We're proud of you. It's us who say, no, I could have been thinner, faster, richer, quicker, whatever. And this is the misconception that Spirit has some kind of a scoreboard and you better reach that or you're going to hell. You see, another fantasy, hell.
I had a woman yesterday, she had cancer and her husband had left her 3 years earlier. They both came to a session of mine and I said to them, no, this marriage is ending. This is, you know, you're going to realize it. And he did leave her right after that. And she was so anguished. She developed cancer. And as I was working on her, it's many, many layers you have to go through. First is the forgiveness of him just for her own peace, not because he deserves the forgiveness.
Yeah.
And then second, she had to go deeper into the fact that she was exhausted with 3 children, always asking for money from her husband who wasn't, you know, paying his alimony on time. And more importantly, all the abandonment issues that she was going through. And finally, she just was so exhausted, she really just wanted to rest. And she couldn't ask for help. She couldn't just ask somebody, I need time off. I need to sleep for 7 days in a bed and reset myself. She couldn't do that. And so she developed cancer and, you know, to try to rest. And when all these things were said, she finally relaxed. You know, she finally understood the whole thing. All her, you know, she had a lot of Italian anger and she was cursing him and angry. And we went through each layer of it in her family. You know, all the different abandonments that happen to women. You know, a woman who is raising children alone without a husband, who's now with some young girl. And all her frustration, and she didn't want to take it out on the children, and she stuffed it, all the emotion in her.
In other words, what he's saying is, you don't develop an illness like this out of nothing. There is, of course, I don't say you want it on purpose, or you said, wouldn't it be great to get cancer? Of course not. Not conscious, but the unconscious and the subconscious. When, you know, when there's the feeling of failure because I didn't make it, I didn't try hard enough, I didn't go beyond my means. In fact, when people come like this, and I look into it, very often it says, you crossed your own line. You know what I mean? You crossed your own boundary of your property. You should have stayed within, not without. That means even the idea of try harder. There is no guarantee that the try harder will work for you. And usually it doesn't work out. And we go all the way back and say, strangely, I don't try so hard. I feel better, or I heal, or I have a better perspective, which is also very important. So life really writes the best stories, you know. I tell you, we live in California and in LA, but life writes the best stories.
You know, when you press on certain parts of her body, she would burst out crying finally. But it took a very long time to get there. And then when she finally felt that she could release and she could let go, then the cancer cells started to say, maybe it's time for us to leave now. Our job is done. So I sang the cancer cells out of the body. For many years I had to sing to cancer cells, even in laboratories, and show scientists that you can destroy a cancer cell, just by listening to it, just by talking to it and telling it what to do. So that was a shock for this woman, but she really had a relief. And I think that's a very big part of healing, is that eventually comes the relief.
So do you think that worldwide, cancer is a huge thing. Do you believe then that this cancer is just everybody not being able to digest whatever they're going through from their side?
It can be an aggression towards yourself also. Like he was talking about, this woman particularly, this Italian woman, was quite aggressive, It's never going to get better no matter what I do. And she was kind of defeatist. And she created something that really raged against her.
Let me give you a more general view on that I believe in my 40 years of active existing with my brain, so to speak. I really believe that the main illness in the world is fear, shame, and guilt.
Yeah.
I always see an illness, a drama, along with unworthiness. I think these are systematic, trained and learned concepts in our societies globally that for one or other reason were created to manipulate people. An illness, especially as aggressive as cancer, cancer is a form of armor, if you want. People who have cancer have a lot of metal in their aura. They look like they're wearing an armor, if you want. And when somebody feels unprotected, unsupported especially, for whatever reason, or the feeling is, I don't know if I can make it in this world. It's getting, crazier with all the, certain presidents in the world and certain political views in the world and certain economic manipulations in the world. I think that by default, the cancer is a form of a shield, if you want. It's a paradox, but the cancer is a manifestation of your will to survive. I remember this one many, many years ago, and I learned a wonderful method that I still advise people to learn. It's called, now it's called Silver Life Method. It used to be called Silver Mind Control. Silver Mind Control. And I was 10 when I learned it, basically, and I never stopped doing it. And in that method, they teach you to communicate with the inner world, so to speak. And I remember talking to this cancer and in this person, and I said to the cancer, why are you growing? And the cancer said, because this woman needs help. She doesn't have anybody, and I wanted to give her comfort so she's not alone. And then I said to the cancer, but you're killing her. And the cancer said, so what? I said, when you kill her, you die too. And so this face on this cancer looked surprised and said, I don't want to die. So I said, could you please stop growing? And the result is that this physically, the cancer stopped growing. It calcinated in the body, and the woman lived with it very happy for the rest of her life, so to speak. So it is really the courage to understand that when we feel unprotected, unsupported, unseen, that illness very often takes a form of it to make us visible, because now we're part of a tribe. We're a tribe of the woman with the breast cancer, and now you deserve a pink ribbon. And then there's people with AIDS, and now we deserve a ribbon with a red ribbon. And now we have this white because you're dumb, and the blonde because you're stupid. And, we label all these things, right? And all the body needs is a resetting because it went beyond its limits. So there is, to me, a misconception about, sky's the limit. Well, no, there is a limit for a reason, because if you go beyond the sky, you're going to be in outer space and you die. So there is a reason why there is a sky. But the ability to empower yourself is at the core of every illness. You lose power over your body. You lose power over your energy. You lose power over your freedom, your authenticity, your belief, even your money, your security. You lose power over your children. It is pretty much always the loss of some form of power. And therefore, healing is a re-empowerment.
Yeah, that's so true. And I feel like we are all in some way losing power when we allow alcohol, substances, people to drain our energy.
Not people, especially people.
Yeah.
People are always saying, I'm so afraid of ghosts. I said, you should be afraid of ghosts. You should be afraid of people. People are that scare me. Ghosts just show up and show off, they just go in and out. But it's people who are very annoying. And, Foster mentioned this term evil and darkness and negativity. The one thing you realize is when somebody is evil, they never feel responsible for what they do. It's people say, I did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. They don't want responsibility. And one way to be spiritually in alignment is to be responsible for what you're doing. Stop waiting for God to save you or to bless you or to, throw you a bone after all the crumbs. This is, I think, the big manipulation on a global level that we learned, is that we have to succumb to some mercy of some invented God. And that is religion, which we are not in and we're not talking about, of course. And the moment, I think, when you disconnect from that idea and you understand there is at the core of all spirituality responsibility. And you accept the responsibility because, as you just said, unless you allow it, I don't say necessarily conscious, but you have to allow something in order to happen to you. There's no other way.
That in itself is just empowering, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I mean, it's something that it's probably really obvious for you to see because you're in it, but those that are just getting into the spiritual path, that's probably really difficult for them to understand, but it's really good advice, right?
I agree. I think it's great to be honest. People who know me, I remember getting really well known in Germany with a line, if you can handle the truth, then you can have a session with him. Because I would be, what you would call brutal. But I always learned very early, if you tell the truth, you don't need a good memory.
Yeah.
Very simple. If you tell the truth, you don't need to remember what you said first. And if things don't make sense, and that was what I saw in spirituality over the years and why I withdrew for so long as well. I always worked alone and did my own thing, is I realized, and I want to tell this to your listeners, there are so many variations of the same thing out there. Some very, very good, some completely crazy, basically. If it doesn't make sense, it's probably not true.
Mm-hmm.
That is what I want to tell them. And if the person does something wrong and doesn't take responsibility for it, you should take your feet in your hand and run away. Truth will always liberate you. It also will give you the least amount of friends. And I can guarantee you, the moment you question, the moment you demand and declare yourself, the moment you make a statement about your own truth and you feel better, people will call you difficult.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you're on the right path.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think we want to ask one more question. We don't want to take up too much of your time because I know you guys are probably really busy. But I think one thing that we are really curious about is, it's almost 2020. It's right around the corner. And I know that there's a lot of energetic shifts happening right now and changes, a collective shift, I guess you'd call it. And Lucia's channeled some information through the Akashic Records, and I'd be curious to know what your take on what's coming for 2020 and what people can really expect, really.
Well, I think that 2020, first of all, like every decade that ends, we are now in 2019. It's the last 9 of the decade. The 9 is always the end. And this is also what you hear very often in the apocalyptic scriptures, that every time when there's a change in the decades, somebody, I'm surprised they haven't showed up yet, somebody will show up and declare the end of the world. 2020 is interesting because the number 20, the 0 is not a number. 0 is an energy symbol. And so 2020, the number 20 in numerology, especially in Kabbalah, in many mystical scriptures, is described as the one with the highest ethic. That means people who have a 20 in their birth date, for example, or as a result, or the number 20 in general, demands to live by the highest principles, by the highest moral code. And if you have a 2020, now double that concept. So I do think that we will go through a period of transparency for the next 2 years, actually. And a revelation of sort will take place, and already begins that we see through certain messages and certain manipulations, and that more and more people, I know it doesn't look like it at the moment, but that the majority on this planet are people who are decent and good and spiritual and holistic to some degree, and that it's a unstoppable trend that will go on. I think that a lot of people will experience this change of the year through the economy and the manipulations of the economy, the news, of course, the confusion of the news, the internet, as nice as it is, and look, it connects us through over a whole Atlantic, which is amazing and can be used in a certain positive way. But people will become much more discerning, I think. Who says what comes from where. And I do see a return of sort to community and to connectivity. I think that the good thing is that all this exaggeration of disconnection and black versus white and Russians against Americans and Argentina against this and country left, country right, all these disconnections ultimately will lead to a tiredness of people of being disconnected, and we will look internally for connections again. I want to say, as a European who lives now for almost 20 years in the US, and that might be also a flawed perception because I'm somewhat white and blue-eyed, of course. but I've seen Americans being very kind, very helpful, and very community-based, which always impresses me, I have to say. You don't have to be in the same opinion, and you will see this in 2020 very much, and the shift will be that if we can't trust outer messages, then we have to talk to each other again. And I think that dialogue will happen and communication will happen. And because the ability to share your opinion so freely through all these social medias, which I think is a great thing, I think that is the true silver lining, I would almost say, for next year. I do have a positive feeling, I have to say, but it doesn't mean that things are going to get easy, because now we're going through a certain growing pain globally. You see, we arrived in Argentina right before the elections, and of course, people asked, us for opinion, and I said, the problem is that the old president was talking about a great future. He always said, in 20 years, Argentina will be rich and well, and in 30 years, it will be at this. And the current president talks all about the past, how wonderful it was, and we should go back to the old values. No one's talking about the now and here. Mm-hmm. And in our own country, in US, we have a representative who talks about basically a time of the 50s and 60s, and that were for him wonderful, I guess. And a lot of people say that was better. And everybody else talks about the future, but there's no one who says, let's look at the here and now. And I think that 2020 will be the beginning of the here and now. We can't just look in the past and fix it in the future, or look at a future and hope it will be better than the past. It will be a conscious decision to look at the present and how much we need to clean up now and reconnect and heal, to talk in shamanic language. Healing will be an important element. I also see a tiredness of people following advice that leads to nothing. And I always say, my biggest achievement is one day when people don't need people like me, then I have achieved my goal. And empowerment, the empowerment of people is, at least for me, one of the most important things. And it happens, I see it happening, especially in US, where communities say, we're not going to wait for the government to tell us if we should recycle our plastic or not, just because we don't have to. We're going to do it anyway. Just because the government doesn't say, listen, just go and do whatever you want, it doesn't mean we're going to go and do it. So there is definitely a common sense that will manifest more and more as the years go by. But we are in a very difficult constellation, not bad constellation, but necessary. And it's like childbirth, as a woman, you should know. It's not the most
no,
easiest thing.
It wasn't easy, and I actually didn't like it.
But there you go, But the moment the baby's there and it's on your chest, you literally, and I know women who told me this, you forget everything that just happened to that moment. And I think this is what we're doing. We are in a birthing process of a new decade.
Yeah.
For shamans, this is all the great purification. So for us, it means that there's going to be a lot more flooding, a lot more water. California has the fires, but also we're going to have fire and water. Great purification usually is through water and fire. And so we're going to experience an acceleration of that. Water's rising, most of all. You're also going to have that feeling of we all collectively are creating our future now. It's not something that is predetermined, or we're much more in conscious control of the decision about how do we want to live our lives and how do we want the society to go. And if that's a large growing pain that will last 400 years, that's an incredible growing pain. But we are at least deciding our future now. And I think that's why this particular moment in history is important. We're much more conscious of creating that future. And I think that's an empowerment.
Well said.
I see so many things with shamanism and what's coming. Shamans are not necessarily so optimistic. They turn to nature to be optimistic. Every tree, every plant, everything is optimistic. All the animals are optimistic. Shamanism is very involved with animals and communicating with animals. But the language of birds, the language of forces. And I hope there's more of that coming. I hope there's more of a connection to the earth, because it is a crucial time that if we don't understand our bodies, the earth, our transformation, and spirit, we'll get very lost. And I think that's something we have to remember. One good thing about shamanism is they really did create ecology. They created this environmental atmosphere, and I think that is a positive contribution. Now let's see what we do with it.
Yeah.
It's in our hands.
There's so many more questions we would want to ask you guys, but we've been on for a while, so we would definitely have to do another episode in the future. I think we missed enough of the questions and we're totally out of time. But before we go, can you just tell people where they can reach you, websites, and whatever other information you want to give before we go?
So the only way to really get informed, because we don't do any kind of commercial or ads or anything like that, and we don't need to, which is quite relaxing. The only thing is that we have a website, which is www.goldenhummingbird.com. That's when you get our official view, so to speak. And then, of course, we are on Facebook, and especially me, I'm on Instagram. And that's pretty much it. So you can find us on the website, and then on Facebook, you can find Foster Perry. We have a Golden Hummingbird community if they want to connect with it. And I have my own projects that I'm running on the site. So that is the easiest way to connect with us.
Perfect. We'll put all the information in the show notes, so we'll get that from you later.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being on the episode with us and for all the information and taking time out of your busy schedules to talk to our listeners. And hopefully we'll be able to talk to you guys soon.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
you.
for having us. I'm afraid we're going to talk again.
Yes.
We are.
Tell your listeners to get ready. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much, guys. And all the best to your listeners.
Yes, all the best.
Tell your listeners to get ready. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much, guys. And all the best to your listeners.
Oh my gosh, everybody. I hope you really, really enjoyed that episode with Kristos and Foster Perry. They are amazing. I'm really speechless that they even took the time to talk to us and to provide all this information for everybody. We are forever grateful, and we will definitely be having them on the podcast again for sure, 100%. I think with all the information provided, I don't want to make this episode too long, but I just want to thank everybody for tuning in, and be sure to follow us on Instagram. Our Instagram handle is @soul_tribe_podcast. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. We are on a bunch of platforms, so subscribe, because a lot of really, really interesting interviews are coming up. We are working really hard to get lots of information and topics to you from really knowledgeable and amazing guests. So be sure to follow, and we hope you have a great week. And let us know what you thought of the episode. If you can give us some feedback, that would be amazing. And definitely share this episode with anybody that you think might benefit from this information or might find this information super interesting, because it's definitely amazing, all of the stuff that they say in the episode. It's just, without words. I'm without words, basically. Thank you, everybody, again. Have a great week. Bye.